Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Friday, December 17th. This is Africa 54.
In Somalia, the compound impact of drought and conflict pushes people to the brink. As hopes that the coronavirus pandemic might be ending fade, a look back on a tumultuous year as Europe struggled to return to normality. And the Congolese rumba is added to the UNESCO World Heritage List.
All sides in the deepening conflict in northern Ethiopia are committing severe human rights violations, according to the United Nations. The UN on Friday is calling for them to pull back from their year-old war. An estimated 5,000 to 7,000 people are being detained, including 9 UN staffers, under a state of emergency. The UN Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, Nada al-Nashif, says thousands of civilians have died and millions have fled as a result of the conflict between the federal government and the forces loyal to the Tigray People's Liberation Front. A draft resolution brought by the European Union to the United Nations that condemns violations committed by all sides would set up an international commission of rights experts on Ethiopia to investigate further and report back after 1 year. But Ethiopia's ambassador to the United Nations in Geneva, Zenebe Kebede Kulcho, is rejecting the resolution, saying his government will not work with any such commission. More than 300,000 people are affected by the worsening drought in Somalia's Galgaduud region. Soraya Ali reports.
This Somali region is caught between conflict and climate change. The worsening drought in the country's Galgaduud region has affected over 300,000 people, according to the ICRC. The federal government declared a state of emergency here last month as thousands left their homes in search of food and water. On top of that, Guriel, a town in central Galgaduud, has seen intensified conflict. Heavy fighting broke out at the end of October between the Somali army and its former ally, the al-Sunnah wal-Jama'ah militia. Dozens were killed and over 100,000 people displaced, according to the United Nations. Hashim is a local resident.
At 50 years of age, I have seen many droughts before. In the past, the droughts were severe and used to last for 1 to 2 years. Now they're happening more and more often. The droughts reoccur in Somalia, as it is with this current drought, and the additional clashes have forced people to be displaced. The two sides are colliding. The clashes have forced people to run away and become displaced. The drought and lack of rainfall have also caused displacement. These things have all come at once.
Hundreds of thousands of people are staying in makeshift settlements on the outskirts of Guriel town. Somalia is one of the country's most vulnerable to climate change, but it receives little climate adaptation funding, according to the Red Cross. The ICRC says 3 decades of conflict have weakened the country's institutions and left some 2.9 million people internally displaced.
Soraya Ali of Reuters filed that report. Turning to North Africa, thousands of protesters demonstrated against Tunisian President Kais Saied in the capital on Friday, pointing to growing opposition of his seizure of power and suspension of parliament 5 months ago. Called to coincide with the anniversary of the uprising that toppled autocrat Zine Al Abidine bin Ali a decade ago, it was the first protest since Saied announced a long-awaited roadmap this week that keeps parliament suspended for another year. Protesters in Tunis chanted freedom, freedom. The police state is over, and the people want the removal of the president. Parliament's biggest party, the Islamist Ennahda, is rejecting the suspension of Parliament for another year. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa on Friday is making good progress with his recovery from COVID-19 while continuing to receive treatment for mild symptoms, according to a statement from his office. Ramaphosa, who was given the Johnson & Johnson's vaccine in February, tested positive for COVID-19 on Sunday. South Africa's health minister says the government believes that vaccines and high levels of prior COVID-19 infections were helping to keep the disease milder in a new wave driven by the Omicron variant. South Africa has given 44% of its adult population at least one dose of the COVID-19 vaccine, more than many African countries, but well short of the government's year-end target. As 2021 nears its end, hopes that the coronavirus pandemic might be ending are rapidly fading as the new Omicron variant sweeps worldwide. Henry Ridgewell looks back on a tumultuous year in Europe as populations and policymakers struggled to return to normality.
In Europe, 2021 ends as it began, battling a new wave of coronavirus infections. In January, the Alpha variant, first detected in Britain, was dominant. By the end of January, Britain had the highest death rate per capita in the world. Much of Europe returned to lockdown.
The government is once again instructing you to stay at home.
But there was hope. Britain had already begun rolling out a mass vaccination programme using the Pfizer-BioNTech jab. It was a scientific breakthrough at unprecedented speed.
When the vaccines first hit the clinic, there was great hope about driving down the numbers of serious infections, hospitalizations, and consequently deaths. And that happened. We were in the middle of a big wave of infections, but we could see light at the end of the tunnel.
Europe saw a deadly third wave of infections in March amid accusations that the vaccine programs were too slow. Some countries suspended use of the AstraZeneca vaccine over blood clot fears, which many scientists say were overblown.
Of the 330 million vaccines doses that have been deployed, we are not aware of any one confirmed COVID vaccine-related death.
By early summer, immunity was building in European populations, and by June, much of the continent had reopened. But the virus continued to mutate. India suffered a deadly wave of infections driven by the newly mutated Delta variant. It soon reached Europe, and by the fall, Delta was spreading rapidly through schools. The World Health Organization once more declared Europe the epicenter of the pandemic. But the vaccines worked. While infections were high, deaths were relatively low. But in November, South Africa reported a new, seemingly far more infectious variant, Omicron. It has now spread to Europe and much of the world. In response, governments have ramped up vaccine booster programs, offering third jabs to all adults.
How this variant interacts with the boosted population is still something we don't know a lot about, and we're not going to for probably, I think, 3 or 4 weeks. Another scenario that we could see, maybe in addition to a lot of hospitalizations, is a mass sickness. So a lot of people in the population getting unwell and needing to convalesce at home.
That would have big effects on healthcare systems and the economy. Scientists say the cycle will continue until a much higher proportion of the global population has been vaccinated.
So far, only 102 million Africans in Africa, or 7.5% of the continent population, is fully vaccinated. More than 80% of the population has not received even a single dose. This is dangerously wide gap.
Dangerous for Africa and dangerous for the whole world as new variants continue to emerge. As the pandemic enters its third year, it's still not clear how or when it will end. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
America's longest war ended in Afghanistan in 2021. But in the final weeks of the war, the Taliban quickly regained control. The United States carried out a chaotic withdrawal, and a massive terror attack killed nearly 200 people, including 13 U.S. service members. VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Bob has more.
America's longest war finished. With al-Qaeda long diminished in Afghanistan, President Joe Biden told the Pentagon it was time to bring troops home.
The military had, in fact, done what it was sent to do in Afghanistan, which was prevent that place from ever being a safe haven for a terrorist attack or a launching pad for a terrorist attack upon the homeland.
America's military had hoped to leave its Afghan partners with a fighting chance against the Taliban. Instead, the Taliban rolled into Kabul in mid-August, creating panic as U.S. evacuations began at Hamid Karzai International Airport.
There was a lot of chaos. There was a lot of confusion. I mean, the president of Afghanistan himself had just gotten on an airplane and flown out of the country, and nobody saw that one coming.
Afghan forces, trained and equipped by the U.S.-led coalition for 20 years, fell in fewer than 20 days. Some of those forces pointed to a lack of food, ammunition, and air support. Local leaders in areas across the country quickly made deals with the Taliban, forcing others to surrender or flee.
Despite being at war for 20 years in Afghanistan, nobody really knew anything. They didn't really understand. U.S. military leadership and political leadership didn't really understand who they were even fighting in Afghanistan, didn't understand the Taliban, didn't understand al-Qaeda, and didn't understand the relationship between those two.
The U.S. helped evacuate 124,000 people in just a few weeks. But that effort was marred by an Islamic State terror attack that killed nearly 200 people, including 13 American service members. Days later, a U.S. drone strike the Pentagon says was meant to hit Islamic State attackers mistakenly killed 10 innocent civilians. Meanwhile,
they won't let us go. They're gassing us and they're shooting at us.
The evacuation left hundreds of American citizens and thousands of Afghan allies behind. Rights groups reported revenge killings of U.S. allies in the months that followed. And the Taliban takeover sparked an economic meltdown.
The free fall of the economy is much more violent, severe, and urgent than we feared. We thought we would manage to survive the winter with pure humanitarian assistance. We now know it's not enough.
The UN says Islamic State Khorasan, once limited to small areas in Afghanistan, has now expanded to every province. And the UN says their attacks against the Taliban and civilians have increased 5-fold this year. American officials have repeatedly vowed to use so-called over-the-horizon capabilities to continue to go after any terrorists in Afghanistan who plan to attack the United States.
That's making sure that we pay attention to the threats as they evolve, and we will remain focused on that with a laser focus.
But the U.S. military now has only about 1 to 2% of the capabilities it once had to look into Afghanistan, the head of U.S. Central Command told the Associated Press. That makes the counter-terror mission there even more difficult. Meanwhile, for Afghans, the future under Taliban rule remains uncertain.
There are mixed signals, some positive, some not. So we hope that it becomes all positive. The alternative is a repetition of the past, which would be, the suffering of the Afghan people, conflict, interference by outsiders in its affairs.
The world is watching to see if the Taliban will govern effectively and respect human rights, and if terror groups will thrive there again as they plot to attack the West. Carla Babb, VOA News, The Pentagon.
As always, we're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We are also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also, check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, UNESCO adds an African rumba to its list of global cultural treasures. We'll have the details when we come back.
health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linoch Mudu, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
And welcome back to Africa 54. A series of flash mob-style thefts in American stores this holiday season is leading to higher security and a lot of finger-pointing. Matt Debo explains.
It's the holiday shopping season in the U.S., but in downtown San Francisco, there are fewer shoppers, more police, and windows covered with plywood. All the result of a recent outbreak of brazen thefts. At this San Francisco suburb, an estimated 80 people converged to steal luxury goods. A similar incident took place in Chicago and Los Angeles, and here in San Francisco's Union Square.
Organized retail crime has been an issue we've dealt with for years. It's not new, but typically we've never seen this level of violence in the middle of the day with consumers, with employees in the stores. It has really taken this to a new level.
Speaking to ABC News after the Union Square thefts, San Francisco Police Chief William Scott had this to say.
We have to make it difficult for people to do what they did last night. Pull up right next to a business, shatter the windows, go in and wipe out everything that they can carry.
Following the incidents, the chief increased the police presence around Union Square dramatically. Stores also added security personnel, but many stores advise employees to not intervene in a crime for safety reasons, a policy that some question.
A few years ago, when they stopped allowing people to stop people taking stuff out of the stores, that was kind of the beginning of the end. If you're soft on crime, this is what you're going to get.
California is one of 39 states that in the past 2 decades has raised the dollar threshold that makes a theft a felony, resulting in jail time. Some feel the attempt to reform the criminal justice system may be encouraging shoplifters. However, a 2017 study by the Pew Charitable Trust found that lower dollar thresholds have not resulted in increased thefts. Michelin suspects that the recent flash mob-style crimes start with a kingpin recruiting young people over social media.
Paying them money, hey, we'll pay you a couple $100. This is what we need you to steal. Keep a little bit of the product for yourself and then give us the rest, and then they're selling it.
The stolen items are often sold on online marketplaces. California and other states have formed coalitions of retailers, law enforcement, and government to tackle the complex issue. Consumers also have a role to play when shopping online.
We need to educate consumers that if you see a really good deal and you're like, wow, I've never seen like a designer bag at this cost before, chances are it's stolen.
Prompted by tradition, shoppers still show up, determined to be merry, while remaining wary. Matt Dibble for VOA News, San Francisco.
From rising seas in Miami to devastating wildfires in California, climate change is putting more and more U.S. communities at risk. As the risks intensify, many are finding that the best option may be to retreat before disaster strikes. 70 kilometers southwest of New Orleans, the first federally funded climate relocation is underway. VOA Steve Baragona reports.
thin strip of asphalt is all that connects Isle de Jean Charles to the Louisiana coast.
The island cemetery?
Chris Brunet's Native American ancestors fled to these remote marshes in the 1800s to escape white settlers.
We've been over here for generations, and so since we are Native Americans, we are tied to the land.
But that land is eroding into the Gulf of Mexico. Isle de Jean Charles has shrunk 98% since the 1950s. Canals for oil and gas drilling and pipelines have eaten away land across coastal Louisiana. Climate change is dealing the final blow as rising seas accelerate the erosion. Brunet has spent his whole life on Isle de Jean Charles, but he says the shrinkage of his island home forced his hand.
It causes people to make decisions they don't want to make, and they're almost forced to make that decision because of climate change.
Where we're walking right now will be houses in less than a year.
Pat Forbes heads Louisiana's Office of Community Development. His office oversees a $48 million federal grant to relocate island residents to this new community about 55 kilometers northwest.
While we hate that we have to do this to create this opportunity, we're glad that we can.
The grant from the Federal Housing Agency, called HUD, is the first to resettle a community threatened by climate change, but likely not the last, as more and more people flee climate disasters, Forbes says.
HUD wanted us to do something that helps all of us learn how to do this better, because there's going to be a lot of it going on.
The project is unique in another way, he adds.
All we've ever done in the past, for the most part, is give people money to go find a house somewhere. And when you do that, the whole community falls apart, spreads out all over the place.
That song is good.
Nearly all of the close-knit community of Isle de Jean Charles will relocate together. Brunet's niece and nephew will join him when the development is finished sometime in 2022. Experts say community can be as important to people as safety. Still, Brunet faces the move with mixed feelings.
It's like uprooting a tree and moving it some other place, and you can only hope that the roots from that tree is going to take into that new ground. That's how I am. You're building me a house, but it's not my home yet.
Uprooted by climate change, experts say more and more people will be forced to build not just new houses, but new homes. Steve Baragona, VOA News, Isle de Jean Charles, Louisiana.
Getting a good night's sleep can be elusive, but sleep tracking rings, watches, and even mattresses may offer insight into how to get a better night's sleep. VOA's Michelle Quinn explains.
Tossing and turning, awake in the middle of the night. Humans spend about a third of their lives sleeping, or trying to. Sleep tracking technology may offer a window into what's keeping them up. 8 Sleep sells a so-called smart mattress. Vibration detecting piezoelectric sensors are packed into the mattress bedding.
They act almost like a stethoscope, where it's picking up on all the different vibrations at the different frequencies that your body is emitting throughout the night.
An algorithm sifts through the night's data for information on body temperature, number of breaths taken, rollovers, and resting heart rate. The next morning, users check their sleep app to see how they did in the various stages of sleep. Louisa Nicola, a neuroscientist and brain performance coach who has a partnership with 8 Sleep, says the rise of sleep trackers like watches, rings, and smart mattresses are giving people valuable information about their sleep health.
You had 15 tosses and turns. We noticed that you got up during the night, so then you can really, gauge an understanding of, you can break apart your sleep and figure out what's going on during those 8 hours.
For example, people don't sleep as well with their pets in bed as they think they do. 8 Sleep's data show while they sleep slightly longer, sleep quality is lower.
The pet in the bed is to have an impact, probably because the pet is also moving during the night. And we see the same with partners. So when you're sharing the bed with someone, people who go to bed together and get out of bed together, they will sleep better.
In the future, the company hopes to add more sensors to its mattress to detect changes in a person's body beyond sleep, information that might point to potential health issues. Michelle Quinn, VOA News.
Turning to Central Africa now, Kinshasa residents welcomed this week UNESCO's decision to add the Congolese rumba to its list of global cultural treasures. But some older fans feel the genre lacks the storytelling power it had in the past. Clara Frank has more.
The Congolese rumba, an African genre of music and dance, has been added to the UNESCO World Heritage List. Its unique sound melds the drumming of enslaved Africans with the melodies of Spanish colonizers. The bid for UNESCO protected status was put forth jointly by the Democratic Republic of Congo and Congo Republic. Andre Yoka is the head of the National Institute of Arts in Kinshasa.
It was a great moment of emotion after so many years of investigation, research and testimonies, but also a duty of gratitude to the history of music in this country, to those who created this music. The artists, the bands, the entrepreneurs, the trainers, the fans. Right now I'm really thinking of these people. Without them, we wouldn't have all this success.
UNESCO, the United Nations Cultural and Scientific Agency, said the rumba was used for celebration and mourning in private, public, and religious spaces. Born in the melting pot of 19th century Cuba, rumba was re-exported to Africa in the early 20th century on vinyl. It found a ready audience in the two Congos, who recognized the rhythms as their own. Clara Frank, Washington.
It's nothing like Congolese music. It's beautiful, including Dombolo. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in America's capital, Washington, D.C., have a great weekend.